Hi guys, thanks for joining us. We'll be going live in a few moments. Just let everybody pile into the room, so to say. Just give it a couple of moments for people to join us. There we go. I can see a few people piling in, which is great. We'll just start in a few moments. Just let everyone clock through into the session. Okay, and then we will begin. Okie dokes. Well, good afternoon and welcome back, everybody, to our next presentation, which will be with our main man, so to say, Mark Lomas, who is our cloud solutions architect over at ProBrand. Mark's going to be looking at hybrid security for small to medium businesses. Really important topic there. Before we get started, a couple of reminders. Please use the polls function to the right of your viewing pane to ask any questions. Please get involved, fling Mark some questions, and I'll pose those to him at the end of the session. If you haven't already, do click the theatre mode button, which is just underneath the viewing pane. That will give you a much better, more immersive experience. You'll be able to see things in full screen. And with that, I will hand over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed. The main man, such flattery. Thank you very much for that, Matt. As Matt outlines there, my name is Mark Lomas at ProBrand, Cloud Solutions Architect. And it's my pleasure to spend about 20-25 minutes on this topic today, talking about hybrid security for SMBs. And realistically, when we talk about hybrid security, I think that to a certain extent, what I'm kind of focusing on here is the hybrid workforce, the kind of new model, the new reality, the new world, I suppose, that many of us have to face these days, that regardless of whether you're still maintaining a physical office or whether you are exclusively home working or having a bit of a mixture of the two, that there are many new realities that we have to face. And as a result, some of the challenges around security that we have to deal with have changed as a result. But of course, you know, we're talking about security all the time, and we're constantly getting bombarded by messages around security. We're constantly hearing about how important security in IT is. And of course it is, but I think obviously the question really is why? What actually are we talking about when we're talking about security? What is security? We can be fairly familiar with security in the physical world, locking our doors, securing our possessions, maybe having burglar alarms on our homes. But in the world of IT, it's a bit different. It's a bit more difficult sometimes to understand because it's very difficult to visualize. We can think in some of the terms that we might understand, but there's a lot that goes on in the world of cybersecurity. And of course, when we start to think about malicious hackers who have huge amounts of knowledge of IT systems and how operating systems work and databases work and software, how it all works, it can sometimes feel very difficult to overcome that challenge. And of course, this is why we look to solution providers and software vendors and antivirus and firewalls to provide some of those answers for us to try and help us out a little bit. So when we want to look at how we define this challenge, how we're defining the challenge of security, I think it's helpful if we just sort of break down to the basics a little bit here. We want to keep the bad guys out, malicious hackers. We want to make sure that those criminals out there, and I think it is useful to think about them in those ways as criminals, keep them out of our systems, stop malicious software and malware getting into our systems, stop hacking from penetrating our data and our secure systems, and of course, keep our assets protected, which might make it seem like it's the same thing, but there are, of course, some other elements here that we need to think about. As will become clear, I'll expand upon that in a moment. Sometimes it can feel like this is the picture, right? This is what we're trying to guard against. The well-planned bank job of con movies and those kind of things that I'm sure we've all seen before, where you have the suave, sophisticated criminal who has figured out a way to con their way or break into a bank vault to steal the contents, steal the jewels, and it's a well-planned operation. And it's true, there is such a thing out there as targeted hacking, where the hackers are going after specific organizations, going after specific data sets. And of course, it can be very tempting to think that as a small business, that's not going to be us. They're not going to be going after us, right? Why would they be interested in us when there are so much larger and more attractive targets out there to go after? But of course, actually, a lot of the time, what we have to worry about is not this kind of sophisticated, pre-planned attack. What we have to worry about is the casual criminal who sees that the door is unlocked or is going down the street trying car handles to see if somebody's left their vehicle unlocked, looking for valuables on display, and then just sort of breaking in and grabbing them. The quick smash and grab job. We're all familiar with things like ransomware, for example. Ransomware spreads like a virus. If we have a system in our network that is not properly secured, maybe doesn't have functional antivirus on it, it could be infected, and now we're on the criminals' radar. They might not have targeted us to begin with, but they're just flinging malware out into the void and seeing what sticks. When it does stick, then you're on their radar. So of course, we want to make sure that we're not on their radar to begin with. And we have to think about antivirus. We have to think about malware and patch management. We have to think about these things to try and make sure that our systems do stay secure. To use that real world metaphor, we want to make sure that the doors are locked. We want to make sure that the alarms are set. We want to make sure that we have, double glazing on our windows. That's a lot harder to smash and break through. We want to make sure that we have those systems in place. But of course, there's more to it than this. As mentioned earlier, we want to protect our key critical assets. Things like our data. Our data is, of course, one of the key critical assets that our IT systems are there to store, regardless of whether it be on premises or in the cloud. Those are our critical assets. And of course, it's not just malicious hacking, whether it be targeted or opportunistic. We've also got to think about things like the human error element to this as well. How do we stop people from accidentally sharing data with the wrong person, accidentally attaching a file to an email and sending it to the wrong place? How do we stop people from taking data and stuffing it on an unsecure USB drive, putting it into a personal cloud storage location, keeping hold of data after they leave the business, which can be an increased challenge these days? People might be accessing your cloud services from a personal machine that they have at home, in which case they could be transferring data down to their desktop. If that person leaves the organization, do they still have that data? There's a range of different things that we need to think about. So there's a lot that we need to think about here and a lot that we need to unpack. And on top of this, I just want to introduce this concept that I'm sure will probably be fairly sensible for many people, the idea of the perimeter lost, that in the cloud world, people are working everywhere. We have an even greater choice in the device types that we have. And the data that people are accessing can be anywhere too. People are out and about with smartphones and tablets and laptops. They're at home. They're in the local coffee shop if they want a change of scene. They come into the office. They go out of the office. Our devices are everywhere. And so as a result of which, our data is everywhere. It's going all over the place. But there's not necessarily a simple security perimeter anymore. The idea of antivirus plus firewall plus patch management used to be quite a good level of security that we could put in place, but it's not necessarily enough anymore because we don't necessarily have that nice, safe, secure perimeter of being able to say, well, everything's behind my firewall and everything behind that firewall is secure. That approach was already sort of crumbling apart in favor of the more common zero trust approach to security, where we're assuming breach. We can't just trust everything behind the firewall because people are taking devices in and out. They're bringing different devices in. We can't trust everything behind the firewall. Now that there is no secure perimeter anymore, people are just everywhere. Our data is everywhere. We need to think about how we maintain control in this kind of environment. How are we going to maintain control over everything that we have when people are working in all sorts of different locations, when our data is in all sorts of different places? And I think one of the first things that we need to think about is how are we going to maintain control over our devices? We've got a plethora of different devices that are in use in our environments. We've got the Windows PCs, of course, still the primary choice for many businesses, Windows PCs and laptops. But of course, we've got more than that. We've got our smartphones and tablets from Apple. We've got our smartphones and tablets running Android, Google devices and devices from other manufacturers running the Android operating system. People might be using Macs. And of course, we might not just be dealing with devices that we own, that we have purchased and provided to our staff. There's an increased likelihood these days that people will want to use personal devices. Now, of course, we had BYOD already as a concept, bring your own device, but this has only increased over time. We've seen people working from home where, yeah, they might have a laptop, but they might have a home office that they've set up where they've got a fixed computer with 2 screens, the full meal deal, so that they can work more productively, and they might want to do that. And of course, as we've seen supply chain constraints and an increased difficulty in getting hold of new laptops and new devices, many of us might have been tempted to simply say, well, if you do have a home PC that you can continue to use, let's go down that route. You can VPN in, or we're in the cloud, so you can just access our cloud portal. What are the security implications there? Do we have good visibility on the security of that device? Are we able to say that we know for sure that that device has good antivirus, good patch management, that its firewall is functioning? How do we know the security status of this device? This is where we need to start thinking about robust MDM solutions, mobile device management. Now, back in the day, mobile device management meant exactly that, management of mobile devices, smartphones, pretty exclusively. But over time, those solutions began to evolve to incorporate more and more devices. And so naturally, the acronyms changed. It went from MDM to EMM, Enterprise Mobility Management. And then it went from EMM to UEM, Unified Endpoint Management, the word mobility being dropped there, because the vendors of these solutions, the different management platforms that are available in the cloud, they wanted to send a firm signal that this wasn't just about mobile devices, that these management platforms are about managing and securing and looking after all of the devices that you use in your organization, typically from the cloud. And of course, this gives us the great benefit that it doesn't matter where the user is located, and it doesn't matter what device they have, and it doesn't even matter whether it's a device that the business owns or the user owns. We've got some management and control. And by having that management and control, we can enforce security policies. We can have some insight into whether the devices that people are using genuinely are properly secure and up to date or not. And we can start to make some decisions about the way in which we're allowing people to use those devices, and whether we're allowing people to come into the network with those devices in the first place. If people are using a home PC, for example, we can insist that those PCs at least be registered with our MDM solution, so that if those devices become risky, maybe the antivirus software stops working, that we know about it. It might not be running antivirus that we've supplied, but if there is at least some antivirus on the device, we can know whether or not it's working properly. And if it isn't, we can prevent access from that device until the problem is solved. And we can say, well, we detected a problem. The antivirus isn't working on your machine. You need to fix that. Otherwise, we can't allow you to be logging in from that device. That's a risk. So we can have that insight. We can have that visibility into what's going on and make some decisions about that. The next thing that we need to do is think about identity. Who is logging in? And of course, this is the fairly basic principle that we all know of, and we're all constantly reminded of this all the time, of usernames and passwords, logins, people having access to our data, access to our software and systems. And we want to make sure that we've got some control over that as well. And we want to make sure that we can put some better protections in, because of course we all know people don't always choose the most secure passwords, or maybe they reuse passwords from one location to another. They're using the same passwords for personal accounts that they use in their life that they're using for their corporate accounts. If a hacker were to, for example, figure out someone's Netflix password, how difficult is it going to be for them to log into that person's Netflix account and have a look at the profile of that user, look up their name, look up some basic details about them, and then go hunting down where they work, have a search around on LinkedIn. Where does that person work? What's their job? And then start having a hunt around to see if they've been using the same password for their login to their work account. It won't be difficult at that point to figure out that that organization might be using 365, Google, or one of the other more popular cloud services out there. Won't be difficult for that hacker to work out what that person's email address is. Their email address is likely going to be their username. And if they've used the same password at work that they have in that Netflix account, that hacker's in. Very minimal work for the hacker to sort of start figuring out where else that person's reused the same password. Of course, this is why we need to protect user logins. This is why we need to look at things like multi-factor authentication to make sure that we're guarding against these kind of attacks and infiltrations into our systems, into our cloud services, into our applications. Using single sign-on can also be quite useful here as well. Rather than asking our users to remember multiple different logins for multiple different sites and potentially increasing the likelihood that they're going to keep following that pattern of reusing passwords, if we only have to ask them to remember one password, well, now we're in a position where we can say, well, just please do use a secure password. We're only asking you to remember one, so please try and use a secure one. Don't use one that you use elsewhere in your life, in your personal logins, for example, for those other services I might have mentioned there. Try and think of something that's unique and secure. And if we've got that single sign-on with multi-factor authentication, then we can be protecting here. And we can combine this with techniques like conditional access, where we're starting to put in place now some additional rules around what we're looking for when a user is logging in. Not just, do they have the right username? Do they have the right password? Not just, do they have the right code sent to their mobile device by text or shown to them in an app, but also, are they physically located in the right place? If your users are only based in the UK, only allow logins from the UK. That could be a conditional access rule that you put in place. But we can go more sophisticated. We can put in place conditional access rules that say, is the user logging in from a device that we trust? If you wanted to, you could say that the device must be one that you own, that is delivered to them by the business. But if you are allowing bring your own device scenarios, you could instead simply say, well, we want the device to be compliant with our security policy. Is our MDM solution able to give us that green tick? And if it is, we can allow access from that device. If it's not compliant, if it's fallen foul of compliancy rules that we've set, we can say, no, we don't want to allow login from that device. We can prevent login. We can have some additional rules in place to lock that down in conjunction with the identity information that we're gathering. So we can start to have some additional checks here. The security guard on the front gate is not just going to be looking to see if someone's got a security tag. They're going to be checking some additional metrics here to make sure that the person that we're letting in is genuinely who they say they are, and the device that they're using to do it is secure. So we can put these additional safety checks in. Lastly, of course, we've got to think about our data. As I mentioned earlier on, our data can be anywhere. It's getting all over the place. Now, we tend to think of our data. If somebody says to you, where do you store your data? You'll be able to answer that question. Think about your files, for example. Are they stored on a file share on a server somewhere? Are they stored in a cloud storage repository? We're gonna name those locations. Those are the locations that we're going to name. But of course, our data is flying around all over the place. People are going to be using tools built into the operating system or downloaded as an app to synchronize the data stores that they have down to their laptop or PC or other device. They're going to be dragging and dropping data down to their desktop. They're going to be emailing files around, which means that our data is ending up in all sorts of different locations. And again, to relate it back to that earlier point, do we have control? Do we have control over that? Because of course, we can set permissions on who can have access to data when it's sat on our server or when it's in our cloud repository. But the moment the data leaves that environment, those permissions are no longer applying. So we have to think about other things that we might need to do to maintain that control. First of all, where is the data? Where is it being accessed? Because anywhere that that data is being accessed is also potentially another location where that data is being stored. If people are accessing, say, a cloud storage repository on a Windows 10 PC, let's say you're using Microsoft 365 and people have OneDrive and SharePoint. Well, people can use the sync client to synchronize that data down to their PC, or they can drag and drop data down to their desktop if they choose to. They've got all sorts of different ways that they can store data locally. So is the data secure wherever it goes? Do we have solutions in place that can encrypt those files, for example? And we're not just talking about whole disk encryption, we're talking about the ability to say that that file is encrypted and that we can put some rules in place so that if somebody did try to upload that file to, say, a personal Dropbox account, that we could block that. Do you have those controls in place? Can you do that? And is that something that you might need to do? If users are using their own PCs, for example, do you have the ability to revoke access to data that they might have copied to their desktop, for example? Again, you might need to put those controls in place. And can you control what's being shared? You might, for example, want to try and encourage people to use sharing facilities in your cloud solution rather than using attachments. It's very easy to just attach a file to an email and press the send button. Of course, the moment you do, it's gone. It's left your environment. And if you discover later that you've sent it to the wrong person, you've got no way of getting that back. It's very difficult to recall that. Whereas if you use sharing capabilities inside your cloud storage repository, you'll always have the ability to sort of just revoke that share, turn it back off again, so that if you realize you've shared it with the wrong person, you can just undo that. So again, this is about making use of controls that you have in the technology, but we've still got to think about our people and whether they're using the tools that are available to them that might make more sense today. Now, there are a lot of possibilities available. Just want to highlight some of them here. Use data leakage prevention controls to reduce accidental sharing of sensitive data. You'll want to think about some rules that you might want to put in there to set some policies up to prevent improper sharing of sensitive data. As mentioned, move away from things like attaching and over to sharing, because it might give you more control and the ability to revoke those shares if you find that they are incorrect. Use data protection to keep control. There are many technologies available there to put some of these file level encryptions and locks in place, keep control over data if a user leaves, that kind of thing. And use the enterprise mobility management and MDM solutions to protect data and devices regardless of their ownership. These are some of the things that you'll want to look at to make sure that you have control and insight into the devices that people are using. Ultimately, you'll want to make use of the tools that are in the cloud to extend control to the assets that matter, your data, your devices, and your logins. Protect against both malicious access and human error together. Keep control. It is your data. What I'm really sort of trying to get at here is that for many organizations, you may well already have the tools at your fingertips inside the cloud solutions that you already have. It's just a case of designing those controls, looking at what's available to you, and then putting those into practice and implementing them there. So these are some of the areas that you'll want to evaluate and review over time. That does bring me to the end of the presentation there. I think we do potentially have a few minutes for some Q&A, but I will leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. Matt, back to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark, for that. We do have a couple of questions and we do have a couple of minutes for some answers. Just to pick one up here, as regards Android and Apple mobile devices, how do you see, for example, an iPhone 6 running iOS 12 only, so unsupported, and therefore it's going to become a higher and higher risk device over time? Should companies abandon such devices and replace and eat that cost?
Yeah, so this is obviously something that comes up over time when we're looking at operating system and device life cycles, devices and operating systems and software becoming unsupported. This is where we start to see problems coming in with things like patch management, for example, that if the manufacturer is no longer supporting the product, that they're not going to be releasing security updates for those devices anymore. You know, I think that sometimes the issue here is that because they're not releasing the security updates, they're also not releasing information about bugs that have been discovered in those products. That doesn't mean the bugs aren't there. Each version of an operating system is just a progression of what came before. You know, we're now up to Windows 11, for example. Windows 11 is just a progression of 10, which is a progression of 8, which is a progression of 7. They all can be traced back right back to Windows XP and 2000 and Windows NT, and there are still bits of those old code bases floating around inside these products. So if a bug were to be found today in Windows 11, chances are it'll be in 10, chances are it'll be in 8, chances are it'll be in 7. Those older unsupported products could be just as vulnerable as well, but they're not being patched. And so that means that, yes, there is an escalating probability of risk by keeping those kind of devices around. So to get cut to the chase and answer the question, should you retire devices running those older products that are unsupported? Yes.
All right, okay, interesting. Thank you. Thanks for that, Mark. Particularly direct at the end, which I liked. That was excellent. Just another one, I guess, from my side, and forgive me, it might sound like a slightly daft one, but what changes have you seen from a security perspective since the influx of remote working? And I know that's quite an extensive question, but maybe there's 3 key things that you've seen as a result of the influx of remote working and the demand for it. Naturally, we all know why.
I think one of the biggest changes that we see is the expansion of personal devices being used to access corporate systems. So with many organizations sort of moving to the cloud and relying quite heavily on cloud services, but even those that aren't, even if you kept your systems on premises and have used traditional remote access, there's an increased likelihood that people might need to use, want to use or need to use a personal device that they have at home, that they already have their own PC, their own Mac, their own devices, because maybe they are better set up in the home environment. Maybe it was easier for them to set up something in a home office environment. Many people tried to sort of lay out a bit of a space there for them. And if they already had that PC available or already had that device, they're going to use it. Or as mentioned earlier in the presentation, perhaps due to supply chain constraints, you just couldn't get a laptop out to somebody and you had to say to people, can you use your own device? Of course, left unchecked, that can present a security challenge there, because if you're not doing anything to monitor and maintain the status of that device, how do you have no idea whether that device is secure or not. That's a risk. There's a potential risk there, because if that home user device were to be compromised or breached or hacked or anything like that, well, that's your data, because people will potentially be transferring data down to their machines or doing things to make it easier to access for them. And it's a question of, do we have control? Do we have the insights there? We knew where we were when it was just our corporate network with our corporate PCs. The moment you start throwing personal devices into the mix, you've got less insight and less visibility. That's what these tools, MDM solutions, for example, are designed to try and give you back, to give you that visibility back, and not necessarily to make life harder, but to give you some tools to make some automated decisions here, so that you can say, we only want to allow access to our data from devices that we know are secure. And you can set those rules up, configure that up, and say, this is what we consider to be our corporate policy. And if something falls foul of it, don't let it in. And you don't even need the IT administrator to necessarily be making that as a day-to-day decision. It can be completely automated. So I think one of the biggest changes there is certainly with the increased use of personal devices, people accessing this data from anywhere. The default settings on many cloud solutions, for example, are just let people log in. Let people log in from wherever they need to log in. If you're using Office, let them go to office.com and log in. If you're using Google, just let them go to the relevant portal and log in. And it's just wide open for people to have that access. Is that appropriate? Is that the best configuration? These solutions, all of these cloud solutions, have the ability, have the tools for you to change those settings and increase your security. And I guess you have to have a little bit of a conversation with yourself and say, well, what data am I handling? And do I need to put some more controls in here?
Brilliant. Brilliant. All right. Thanks so much, Mark. Fully rounded answer to what I appreciate was quite a tough and very open question, but really interesting nonetheless. Thanks. Brilliant as always, Mark. Really enjoyed the presentation. That's it for this one, guys. We'll keep you up the pace. Just looking at the time, a couple of minutes time, at 2:30, there's two further presentations. Well, a panel debate and a presentation starting simultaneously for you. Look forward to seeing you over there on the other side. Thank you. And it's the end of this session for now. See you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.